The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Right now, at this very moment, no oil tanker can pass through the narrow waterway that connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Iran has effectively blockaded the strait using naval mines, missile batteries, and fast attack boats. And that single action has just triggered the most severe energy crisis in modern history. 21% of the world's oil supply flows through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That is 21 million barrels of oil daily from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf producers. All of that oil is now trapped. It cannot reach global markets. And within hours of Iran's blockade being confirmed, oil prices exploded from $75 per barrel to over $150 per barrel. They have doubled overnight. Gas stations across America, Europe, and Asia are preparing for prices to skyrocket. Airlines are canceling flights because fuel costs are suddenly unsustainable. Trucking companies are parking their fleets. Factories that depend on cheap energy are shutting down production lines. And financial markets are in free fall as investors realize that a global recession is no longer a possibility. It is imminent. It is happening right now. And it was triggered by Iran's decision to weaponize the one choke point that the entire world economy depends on. The Strait of Hormuz, a passage just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, has become the most dangerous place on Earth. And the consequences of its closure will be felt by every human being on the planet within days. Let me explain exactly what happened, why Iran closed the strait, how they did it, what it means for oil prices and the global economy, and why this could be the moment that transforms a regional war into a global economic catastrophe that triggers recession, inflation, and potentially even the collapse of governments. The Strait of Hormuz is located between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. It connects the Persian Gulf, where most of the Middle East's oil is produced, to the Gulf of Oman, and then to the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean. Every oil tanker leaving Saudi Arabia's eastern coast, Iraq's southern terminals, Kuwait's ports, or the UAE's facilities must pass through this strait to reach customers in Asia, Europe, and beyond. There is no alternative route. The only other option is pipelines, but pipeline capacity is limited and cannot replace the volume that tankers carry. So when the strait closes, 21% of global oil supply is immediately cut off. That is not a minor disruption. That is a catastrophic supply shock. And it happened today, March 1st, 2026, as Iran's retaliation for the U.S.-Israeli strikes that killed Supreme Leader Khamenei and destroyed much of Iran's military infrastructure. Iran has been threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz for decades. Every time tensions escalate, Iranian officials warn that if Iran is attacked, the strait will be closed and the world will suffer. But until today, those threats were never fully carried out. In 2019, Iran seized a British oil tanker and mined the strait, but did not fully close it. In 2020, Iran conducted naval exercises that temporarily disrupted shipping, but did not block all traffic. Even during the current war, which began February 28th, Iran has attacked individual tankers and threatened closure, but had not actually sealed the strait. Until now. This morning, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy deployed dozens of fast attack boats equipped with anti-ship missiles across the narrowest section of the strait. These small, maneuverable boats are difficult to target and can launch missiles at tankers from close range. Simultaneously, Iran laid naval mines in the shipping lanes. These mines, which float just below the surface, will explode if a ship's hull makes contact with them. Clearing mines is a slow, dangerous process that requires specialized minesweeping vessels. And even after mines are cleared, there is always the risk that more have been laid. Iran also activated coastal missile batteries along the northern shore of the strait. These batteries are armed with anti-ship cruise missiles that can hit tankers from distances of over 100 kilometers. And Iran has made clear that any tanker attempting to transit the strait will be fired upon. Finally, Iran sank a large cargo ship in the middle of the narrowest section of the channel. The ship now sits on the bottom, creating a physical obstruction that blocks the main shipping lane. Tankers cannot simply sail around it because the waters on either side are too shallow for the massive vessels that carry oil. So the wreck must be removed before traffic can resume. And removing a sunken ship from a contested war zone is a complex operation that could take weeks or months. All of these actions combined mean that the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. No commercial tanker captain is willing to risk their ship, crew, and cargo by attempting to transit a waterway filled with mines, surrounded by missile boats, and covered by coastal missile batteries. And even if a captain were willing to take that risk, insurance companies have declared the strait a war zone and have canceled coverage for any vessel entering the area. Without insurance, no tanker can sail, so the oil is trapped. Within hours of Iran's closure being confirmed, oil prices on global markets exploded. Brent crude, the international benchmark, was trading at approximately $75 per barrel before the war started on February 28th. By the evening of February 28th, after the first strikes, oil had risen to $95 per barrel as markets priced in war risk. On March 1st, after Khamenei's death was confirmed and Iran's retaliation intensified, oil hit $120 per barrel. And today, March the 2nd, after the strait closure was verified, oil prices spiked to over $150 per barrel in morning trading. That is a 100% increase in less than 4 days. Oil has doubled, and it is not stopping at $150. Analysts at Goldman Sachs, JPMorgan, and other major banks are now forecasting that if the strait remains closed for more than a week, oil could hit $200 per barrel. If the closure lasts a month, oil could reach $250 to $300 per barrel. At those prices, the entire global economy would collapse. Let me explain why. When oil prices rise, every single product and service that depends on energy becomes more expensive. Gasoline prices at the pump will double or triple within days. In the United States, gas prices were averaging around $3.50 per gallon before the war. They could hit $7 to $10 per gallon within 2 weeks if oil stays at $150. In Europe, where fuel is already heavily taxed, prices could exceed €3 per liter, which is roughly $12 to $15 per gallon equivalent. Consumers will not be able to afford to drive. That means less spending on everything else. Retail sales will collapse. Restaurants, entertainment, travel, all discretionary spending will evaporate as households divert income to just filling their gas tanks. Airlines will be devastated. Jet fuel is derived from crude oil, and airlines operate on razor-thin profit margins. When fuel costs double, airlines cannot absorb the increase. They will raise ticket prices dramatically, which will reduce demand, forcing them to cancel routes and lay off employees. Some smaller airlines will go bankrupt. International travel will become prohibitively expensive. Trucking and logistics companies will face the same crisis. The cost of moving goods by truck, train, or ship will skyrocket. And those costs will be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for everything. Food prices will surge because food must be transported from farms to stores. Manufacturing costs will rise because factories use energy and because the components and materials they need must be shipped. Inflation, which many countries have been fighting for years, will explode. Central banks will face an impossible choice. They can raise interest rates to fight inflation, but that will kill economic growth and trigger recession. Or they can keep rates low to support growth, but that will allow inflation to spiral out of control. Either choice leads to economic pain. And the pain will not be limited to wealthy countries. Developing nations that depend on imported oil will face economic collapse. Countries like Pakistan, Egypt, Sri Lanka, and many others are already struggling with debt and inflation. A doubling or tripling of oil prices will make imports unaffordable, leading to fuel shortages, power blackouts, and social unrest. We could see governments fall. We could see revolutions and coups. We could see mass migration as people flee countries that can no longer function. This is not an exaggeration. This is what happens when 21% of global oil supply is cut off. The world does not have spare capacity to replace it. OPEC does not have enough spare production to make up the shortfall. The United States has increased oil production in recent years, but it cannot replace 21 million barrels per day. Strategic petroleum reserves can provide a temporary buffer, but they are limited and can only last weeks or months, not years. So why did Iran do this? Why did Iran take an action that will cause global economic suffering, including harm to its own economy and to countries that have been neutral or even sympathetic to Iran? The answer is that Iran is desperate. Is Iran's government has been decapitated. Khamenei is dead. 7 top officials are dead. The regime is in crisis. The Assembly of Experts is meeting to choose a new supreme leader, but there is no consensus. Meanwhile, the United States and Israel are continuing to bomb Iranian military facilities, and Iran's conventional military has been unable to stop them. Iran has fired hundreds of missiles at Israel and U.S. bases, but most have been intercepted and the damage has been limited. 3 American troops have been killed. 6 Israelis have been killed. But those casualties are not enough to force the United States to stop. So Iran has played its final card, economic warfare. By closing the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is inflicting pain not just on the United States and Israel, but on the entire world. Iran is betting that global economic pressure will force the United States to negotiate and end the war. Iran is calculating that when gas prices in America hit $10 per gallon, when European economies slide into recession, when Asian countries face fuel shortages, the political pressure on Trump and other Western leaders will become unbearable. Voters will demand an end to the war. Businesses will demand relief. And Trump will have no choice but to negotiate with Iran, even if it means accepting terms less favorable than total Iranian surrender. That is Iran's strategy. And it might work. Trump has already said he is willing to talk to Iran. But Trump's conditions for talks are that Iran must stop attacking U.S. forces and must give up nuclear weapons. Iran's conditions are that the United States must stop bombing and withdraw from the region. Those positions are incompatible. But with oil at $150 and heading toward $200, the economic pain might force both sides to compromise. But there is a major complication. The United States cannot allow the Strait of Hormuz to remain closed. If the strait stays closed for weeks, the economic damage will be so severe that it could trigger a global depression. American voters will blame Trump. Trump's presidency will be defined by economic catastrophe. So Trump has 2 options. Option 1, negotiate with Iran quickly, agree to a ceasefire, and hope that Iran reopens the strait as part of a deal. Option 2, use military force to reopen the strait. The second option is what the U.S. military has been preparing for since the 1980s. The Pentagon has plans to forcibly reopen the Strait of Hormuz if Iran closes it. Those plans involve minesweeping operations to clear the naval mines, airstrikes, and missile strikes to destroy Iran's coastal missile batteries, and naval operations to sink or drive away Iran's fast attack boats. The U.S. Navy could, in theory, reopen the strait within days or weeks. But doing so would require a major escalation of the war. American forces would have to operate inside the strait in extremely dangerous waters under constant threat of Iranian attack. American casualties would mount. Ships could be damaged or sunk. And Iran would view the operation as an invasion of its territorial waters, prompting even more intense retaliation. Iran could fire more missiles at U.S. bases, attack oil facilities in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and unleash Hezbollah to bombard Israel with tens of thousands of rockets. In other words, the operation to reopen the strait could expand the war into a full-scale regional conflict that kills thousands and destroys critical infrastructure across the Middle East. So Trump faces an agonizing choice: negotiate and end the war, accepting less than total victory, or escalate militarily to reopen the strait, risking a wider war and higher American casualties. And there is a third complication. Other countries are pressuring Trump to end the war immediately. European leaders are panicking because their economies are heavily dependent on oil imports. Germany, France, and Italy are already sliding toward recession. If oil stays at $150 for more than a few weeks, their economies will collapse. European leaders are calling Trump, urging him to negotiate with Iran and end the war. They are willing to offer sanctions relief, economic aid, and diplomatic concessions to Iran if it will reopen the strait. China and India are also demanding action. Both countries are massive oil importers. China's economy is built on cheap energy. India's growth depends on affordable fuel. If oil stays expensive, both countries face economic slowdowns that could lead to political instability. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Modi have both issued statements calling for an immediate ceasefire and the reopening of the strait. Even Saudi Arabia, which has been hostile to Iran, is now calling for de-escalation. Saudi Arabia is an oil exporter, so high prices should benefit them. But Saudi Arabia's oil is trapped in the Persian Gulf along with everyone else's. Saudi tankers cannot leave through the strait, so Saudi Arabia is not profiting from high prices. Instead, Saudi Arabia is suffering along with the rest of the world. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman reportedly called Trump yesterday, urging restraint and offering to mediate talks between the U.S. and Iran. And Russia is taking advantage of the crisis. Russia is one of the few major oil exporters that does not depend on the Strait of Hormuz. Russian oil can be shipped through the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, and the Arctic. So Russia is now selling oil at premium prices to desperate buyers. Russia's economy is getting a massive windfall from the crisis. And Russia is using that leverage to demand concessions from the West on Ukraine and other issues. Putin is essentially saying, if you want me to help ease the oil crisis, you need to give me what I want in Ukraine. So the world is fracturing. Every country is looking out for its own interests. And the global order that existed before this war is unraveling. But let me bring this back to what it means for ordinary people, because the macro geopolitics matter less than the immediate impact on daily life. If you live in the United States, Europe, or any developed country, you are about to experience economic pain that you have not felt since the 1970s oil shocks. Your gasoline costs will double or triple. Your heating and electricity bills will increase. Food prices will rise because food production and transportation depend on energy. Airfare will become unaffordable. Shipping costs will increase, so online shopping will become more expensive. Inflation will surge, eroding your savings and your purchasing power. And if you lose your job because your employer cannot afford higher energy costs, you will struggle to find new work because the entire economy will be contracting. If you live in a developing country, the situation is even worse. Your government may not be able to afford fuel imports. Power plants will shut down, causing blackouts. Hospitals will struggle to operate. Food shortages will emerge because farmers cannot afford diesel for tractors, and because food cannot be transported. Your currency will collapse as your country runs out of foreign exchange to pay for imports. And your government may face protests, riots, or even revolution as desperate citizens demand solutions. This is not hypothetical. This is what happened in Sri Lanka in 2022 when fuel shortages triggered an economic collapse and the government fell. And Sri Lanka's crisis was caused by much smaller disruptions than what we are seeing now. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz is an order of magnitude worse. So what happens next? Over the next 48 to 72 hours, several things will occur. First, Trump will face enormous pressure from allies, from Congress, from businesses, and from voters to do something. Trump will have to decide whether to negotiate with Iran or to use military force to reopen the strait. My guess, based on Trump's statements about being willing to talk and based on the political impossibility of allowing a global depression on his watch, is that Trump will choose negotiation. He will offer Iran a deal. Ceasefire, partial sanctions relief, and recognition of Iran's right to civilian nuclear energy in exchange for Iran reopening the strait, abandoning weaponization of its nuclear program, and agreeing to limitations on its missile program. Iran will likely accept some version of that deal because Iran is also suffering. Iran's economy is being destroyed by the war. Iran needs sanctions relief. And Iran's new leadership, whoever it is, will want to show that they can deliver peace and prosperity. Second, the U.S. Navy will begin mine-sweeping operations even while negotiations are happening. The U.S. cannot wait for a deal to start clearing mines because the process takes weeks. So U.S. and allied mine-sweeping vessels will enter the strait and start working, accepting the risk of being attacked. Third, oil prices will remain elevated until there is a clear path to reopening the strait. Even if a deal is announced, it will take time to clear the mines, remove the sunken ship, and verify that Iran has withdrawn its missile boats and deactivated its coastal batteries. During that time, oil will stay expensive. So expect gas prices to remain high for at least the next month, possibly longer. Fourth, some countries will not wait for the strait to reopen. They will seek alternative sources of oil. The United States will increase domestic production. Europe will buy more oil from Russia, despite sanctions. China and India will negotiate deals with Russia, Venezuela, and other non-Gulf producers. This will create a new global oil market structure that is more fragmented and less dependent on the Middle East. And fifth, the war itself will wind down. Both sides have realized that they cannot win militarily. The United States has killed Iran's leadership, but cannot invade and occupy Iran. Iran has closed the strait, but cannot sustain the closure indefinitely without destroying its own economy. So both sides will move toward a negotiated settlement. It will not be pretty. Neither side will get everything it wants, but it will end the war and reopen the strait. And that is what the world needs right now. But here is the sobering reality. Even after the strait reopens, the damage will have been done. The global economy will have contracted. Recessions will have begun in multiple countries. Unemployment will have risen. Inflation will have surged, and it will take years to recover. Some economists are already comparing this crisis to the 1973 oil shock, which triggered a global recession that lasted years. Others are comparing it to the 2008 financial crisis. But this could be worse because it combines energy shock, war, and geopolitical instability all at once. Governments will respond with stimulus spending, but many governments are already heavily indebted and cannot afford massive stimulus. Central banks will try to manage inflation and support growth, but they cannot perform miracles. The pain is coming, and millions of people around the world will suffer. So subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is far from over. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Oil prices have doubled. A global recession is beginning. And the next few weeks will determine whether the world economy survives this crisis or collapses into something far worse. 21% of the world's oil is blocked, and the consequences are only just beginning.